Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be ranking every player in the history of the Genius. Now there aren't actually that many players of the Genius. There are 36 players. There are only 4 seasons, with one of those being an all-star season, and seasons 2 and 3 having some returnees. So it's like really 36 players isn't that many to rank here. But to be honest, I just really wanted to do a Genius video. I haven't done a Genius video in a while. A lot of that having to do with, to be honest, there aren't really that many ideas to do for a Genius video, especially ones that don't require rewatching the series, which is something that, to be honest, I don't have the time for. So I decided, you know what, screw it. Let's do a player ranking. This should be fun. Initially it was going to be a top 10, but it's like, why not just do everybody? Let's just get started off with number 36. At number 36, this is weird because, like, normally at the bottom of the list, I have a first boot. On my survivor list, if I eventually do worst players of all time, number 1 will be a first boot. Big Brother, same thing. The Genius, it's not that. And a lot of the reason for that is we look at the first boots of the Genius. The first boot eventually came back for grand final and did extremely well. The first boot in season 2 came back for season 3 and did pretty mediocrely, but I mean still enough to not be at the very bottom. And then the first boot from season 3 I felt like had some acumen to her. So at the bottom here we actually have a second boot. So at 36 we have JAE-KYUNG, and this one was tough because it's like, again, she is a second boot. She did survive one round, but then when really thinking about it, the one round she survived was Food Chain, and even there she didn't play particularly well. But I think that's a game that always leads to a big target being the loser of that game, and due to JAE-KYUNG really just not doing anything, she is able to survive that first round. And then in the second round, she really has no clue what's going on. No one wants to align with her. She's really just left out of the loop until she gets pulled into a deathmatch by a HONG-CHUL just because, like, he knows he can beat her. And she does lose in a pretty embarrassing fashion where he just simply outplays her, where every single person in the game is lying to get garnets, and really JAE-KYUNG just played pretty poorly, so I thought that was enough to land her here at the bottom. Now number 35, we do have the first boot from season 3, we have Juri. And Juri was a tough one to rank because I did obviously consider her for the very bottom, but then when I really thought about it, it's like at least she had a core alliance. Like at least she had a path moving forward, unlike JAE-KYUNG. JAE-KYUNG had no clue what was going on, never had any allies. Juri had some close allies that did want to save her, with Dongmin being one of them, who you definitely want on your side. So for me, that was enough merit to not put her on the bottom, though, I mean, at the same time, she does lose a death match to Ah-Young, of all peoples. I mean, that's not great, but for me, she at least had a group of people that wanted to work with her, so she lands here at number 35. Now at number 34, we have Jimmy Cha. It seems like a lot of the players on that season really respected him and really listened to him, but he was just not good at the game. I mean, like, he would always, like, tell everyone all the plans and all the optimal moves for the game. And, like, yes, he did actually orchestrate that third round, the round that he actually eventually gets eliminated on, but he plays the first 2 rounds pretty poorly. I mean, that second round especially, where he's just completely out of the loop there. And he is someone that was able to build bonds, though. He did have a really close relationship with KYUNG-RAN, and it's like, really, despite him being kind of strategically aloof, it's like he's someone that was good at creating the first step of the plan, but wasn't able to go beyond that. It's like people would be able to outthink all the plans that he was bringing up. But he loses the first deathmatch he was involved in. I just really don't think he was someone that was that good at the game, so for me, he lands here at number 34. Now at number 33, we have someone that at one point I considered to be at the very bottom of the list, but I did move him up a bit, and that is YONG-SUK. And the reason for that is because I think he is at least competent in death matches. The thing about YONG-SUK is that he came into that game with such a massive target on him and was supposed to be eliminated second, but was able to win a death match against KYUNG-HOON, who we see in grand final to be a very solid deathmatch performer. I think YONG-SUK being able to beat him is an indication of his ability in the game. I also think just YONG-SUK in general is a very savvy guy. I think he seems like a guy that knows what to do strategically. It's just he's not able to enact that. But really, the main reason why he is as high as he is because of the deathmatch win that he had. Because I think at the end of the day, if we look at the Genius is really fundamentally at the end of the day about your deathmatch ability. You win the game by winning 2 out of 3 death matches. That's how you win the Genius. Yes, the main matches and the alliances that you make can move you forward into the game, but you fundamentally win the game through death matches. And the fact that YONG-SUK is solid at death matches, I feel like that was enough to put him higher than those other people. Now at number 32, I have MIN-SEO, and MIN-SEO is another one that could have been the bottom player on the list, but I do think, one, it is impressive that she, along with Sang-min, I mean, it was probably more Sang-min than her, but still, I mean, she pulls off the Garnet heist in episode 1, is able to get Jin-Ho to save her over Jun-SUK, his closest ally. I think that has to at least give her some merit there, but I mean, really, again, she's not a great player. I think she comes off as overly schemy, she plays too hard. I think when she's against Yoram in round 2 in the deathmatch, I really don't think she had much of a shot there, just considering how openly schemy she was. Like, I don't think she's a great player, but I do think that Garnet heist was pretty impressive for me. Now at number 31, we have YONG-GYEOL, is how you pronounce his name, I believe. Whatever, the 4th boot from season 2. I mean, he's another guy that I just always looked at as pretty schemy. He's someone that I just don't know how anyone ever trusts in a game of the Genies. He's always wearing his sunglasses, which isn't particularly great. If we look at his record, I mean, the only time he was even up for elimination was that first round, where again, it was the food chain. There were bigger targets than him in HWEE-JONG and YOON-SUN to be pulled into the deathmatch. After that, he was just lumped into that seed exchange game and got immunity through that. In the 3rd round, there was just that opportunity to put Yoo-Young and DA-HYE in the deathmatch, so it's like, why not do it? So really, I just don't feel like he did much on his own to get through those rounds. But then in round 4, where he does eventually win, he's just too openly schemy to the other people. Like, he's backstabbing his own group too openly in that round, and really becomes a person that can't be trusted. So for me, I thought 31 was a pretty good spot for him. Now at number 30, we have HWEE-JONG, the 1st boot from Rule Breakers, but the 4th boot from Black Garnet. And this is the thing about HWEE-JONG. I think HWEE-JONG has a fantastic downfall in that first episode, but really, if you think about it, I do find it really impressive that he was able to build that core group he was able to have, because he did have a very loyal alliance to him. The problem with that was that it wasn't the majority, but it was close to it. And like, the fact that he was able to even have that and be the leader of that alliance, even though it was just for that one round, I think is something I have to give him credit for. And the fact that he toned down his game for season 3 and seemed to be well liked by a lot of the players there, I do think that is something that you have to give him credit for. I think he's able to change up his game. Now, did it work out for him? Not necessarily. I mean, like, he did mess up the Swords and Shields game and ends up in the deathmatch with Jung-HYUN and ends up losing that, but he did have some close allies in that game, and I do think his game was a lot better on that season, so for me, he lands here at number 30. Now at number 29, we have a player that I kind of was mixed on. I didn't really know what to do with him, but I have him here, and that is DO-HEE. And DO-HEE is someone that I think has a strategic mind for a game. I think he's good at certain aspects of the game. He's another one that is willing to backstab people. He's willing to flip on alliances. But I just feel like he's another one that's just kind of aloof a lot of the time. I mean, his elimination in episode 6, the way he goes out is just hilarious. And I do think he takes things a bit too personally. I mean, the fact that he was really upset at people betraying him, yet he was planning on betraying them at the same time, I think is just kind of dumb. I don't think it was great that he was pretty much helping in the elimination of the only people that were willing to work with him. And he was never really the type of person that would really lead the charge on any strategies within the game. So overall for me, he lands here at number 29. Now, number 28, we have, actually, I forgot this person was this high on my list, but whatever, it's GURA. And GURA is someone that I feel like could have played a much better game if he wanted to play a much better game. He's kind of being knocked down a lot due to the fact that he just didn't seem to want to play the game in the last few episodes that he was in. It seemed like he really just gave up in the game, because like, I do think he did some really impressive things. I think in episode 1 he played pretty well. Episode 2, I think he pretty much dominated that episode, with him pretty much ruling that entire election. He then became on the outs during episode 3, and I think from that point on he just kind of just like lost interest in the game. But I think if he still had the drive to win the game and played as well as he did in episode 2, I think he could have been a fantastic player, but he just really didn't try. So for me, that's enough for 28 here. Now at number 27, we have YON-SUN. And YON-SUN's someone that I think is tough, because it's like, I think she has a very good mind for the strategic element of the game. It's just she's never able to get allies on her side. I mean, and she's been an early boot in both of her seasons. She was the 5th boot on Rule Breakers. She was the 4th boot on the Grand Final. I think she openly made herself too big of a target during that first round of Rule Breakers, and that's why she goes into the deathmatch with HWEE-JONG. and only survives due to a game of Quattro, which is not a great situation to be in. I think she's willing to flip on her alliances and make deals with other people. I think that part of her game is impressive, but I just don't really see her ever making it towards the end game of any season just due to her having a massive target on her back. So because of that, she lands here at number 27. Now number 26 is someone that I really don't have that much to really say about, and that is SU-JIN, who I just feel like played okay. I mean, she was someone that did have some loyal allies to her, some people that were trying to save her, but she was someone that just simply wasn't good at death matches. She didn't win double-sided poker against YONG-SUN, and really, that's the main reason she goes home. There really just isn't much to really say about her, as I don't think she was like some strategic mastermind in the game, but I do think she was good enough socially to have some allies, and really that's enough for her to land here at number 26. Now at number 25, we have another person that's similar to that. Again, another earlier boot, but someone that I think did a decent job socially, and that is CHANG-YEOP. And CHANG-YEOP is someone that it was really him and SUNG-KYU like fighting for the same position in the game, but I think CHANG-YEOP was initially the person that SUNG-KYU wanted to be. I mean, CHANG-YEOP was someone that was within the majority a good chunk of the time, but was also looked at as a person that you could pick up within that majority. And we see in episode 2 that GURA picks up CHANG-YEOP to become the president of that game. That's impressive. In episode 3, he is able to get immunity from KYUNG-RAN and seems to have a pretty good relationship with the majority group in episode 4, even when he gets eliminated. I mean, the JIN-HO, KYUNG-RAN, Sang-MIN, Yuram, Poong, like these people that won immunity, they all wanted to save CHANG-YEOP from elimination, and they chose JUNG-MOON as the deathmatch eliminee to try to save him, and even then it doesn't work. So I do find it impressive that he was able to get all these people that wanted to work with him, and all these people that actively tried to save him. So while I don't think he has the greatest strategic acumen in the game, I do think that alone is enough to land him here at number 25. Now number 24, we have another early boot, and in my opinion, probably the early boot that had the most potential in the game. And for me, that is DA-HYE. And DA-HYE is someone that I think had a very good strategic mind for the game. I think the way she played the food chain game was pretty great. She was part of the safety chain in episode 2, but in episode 3, I think she just really gets screwed over by what ends up happening there, where the players found out a way for everybody to be immune but 2 people, and she just so happened to be one of them. But then we see her return in the final episode of the season and play pretty impressively there. We're winning the game with the JIN-HO and DO-HEE there. Like, I really do think her overall, she is a solid player, but just we haven't been able to see the full potential of her ability. So because of that, I couldn't put her too high, but I did decide that she was probably one of the better players to be taken out early, so she is pretty much on top of a lot of the earlier boots. Now, number 23 from season 3, we have one of the best characters in the series, but probably not the greatest player, and that is YOU-YOUNG. And I don't know really what to do with YOU-YOUNG, because YOU-YOUNG is someone that I think has some flashes of genius. I do think she is an intelligent person in the grand scheme of things. I just think in the genius, she is a bit aloof at points. I think she's a bit of a follower. I think she followed Dongmin and Hyungmin for way too long. And even at the point that they decided to flip on them at that final 7, like they weren't able to execute there, and then by the time of the final 6, she just flips back to them. It's really an asinine move in my opinion. I do think it's impressive that she does win that black and white game against Jury. I think that's something that I never would have expected out of her, especially considering the sort of persona that she gives off. But I do think that persona that she gives off is also a weakness in her game, because I do feel like it gives a lot of people the impression that she's an easy person to beat in a deathmatch. I really just didn't know where to rank this, because again, I do feel like she has moments of decent strategy, but is also just perceived to be the weakest player, and also is just a follower a lot of the way through. So for me, I felt like 23 was a decent spot for that. And at 22, we have a pretty similar player to that in my opinion, that is Yuram. Now the main reason I'm putting Yuram higher than YOU-YOUNG is because I feel like Yuram was more active in the strategic talk of her season, but at the same time, I feel like Yuram is kind of in a similar position of where I feel like she was aloof for a lot of the game. I mean, she was someone that thought she was going to win the election during the election game and actively lost that. She also lost the scamming horse race because she was waiting for information, just was never told that information. But at the same time, again, like YOU-YOUNG, I think she was well liked within the cast, and that was proven twice by her winning streak, literally twice within the game. She seemed to have really good relationships with KYUNG-RAN and Sang-MIN, and really just overall was a solid player, but I just think she got outplayed, and I don't really see her as a cutthroat player, someone that's willing to do what she needs to win the game. So for me, she lands here at number 22. Now at number 21, we have another player from season 1, and we have Poong. And Poong was a tough one as well, because like really, I think Yuram has more potential to make it further on most seasons of the Genius. But I just feel like Poong probably has more ability overall. I think he was a very self-interested player. He's someone that can make deals with people, someone that played a very strategic game. But at the same time, he didn't really make the greatest relationships. So, by the time he ends up going out, he was pretty much being targeted by the entire group there outside of Jin-Ho. And even Jin-Ho was willing to let him go. I think Poong seems to have the strategic ability to win the game, but doesn't seem to have the social ability to do well enough in main matches to carry him all the way to the end. So for me, he lands here at number 21. Now at number 20, and I feel like this person's probably too high in retrospect. I don't know why this person is this high, but at 20, I have Jung-MOon. And this is the thing about Jung-MOon, is that she has played twice and has gotten 9th and then 7th in her 2 seasons. And I do think she makes a lot of questionable strategic decisions within the game. She's never won a main match throughout her entire history of the show. Through 12 rounds of the show, she's never won a main match, which is ridiculous. But I think she's a scrapper. I think she's someone that is always going to try new things to try to make it further. She's a fighter. She is going to continuously try. And for me, that was a lot of the reason why I decided to put her as high as she is, but probably in retrospect, considering she never seems to be too trusted by really anybody and also seems to make some wrong strategic decisions. Maybe she should have been lower on the list, but for now, I did have her at number 20. At number 19, we have another one of the best characters in the history of the show, but probably not the greatest player, and that is HONG-CHUL. And HONG-CHUL is, again, fantastic TV, and I think through that, he also is able to use that humor that he has to build really strong relationships. However, I just don't feel like he's all there strategically. He is someone that is willing to flip on his alliances and openly deceive people, but at the same time, that's really mostly due to, in my opinion, him just trying to make great TV. I just think he's doing whatever he can to ham it up for the show. And while that's cool, that's not necessarily the best gameplay. I do think it's impressive how he survives round 2, where he is able to turn the entire cast against JAE-KYUNG. So, at least you have to give him credit for that. Again, he is someone that wheels and deals, but I just feel like he was a bit aloof at certain points during the main matches. It really just isn't a great player overall. So for me, he lands here at number 19. Now at number 18, we have Young-JOO. Kind of like Ah-Young, I think she has similar faults in her game. I think she followed Dongmin and Hyungmin for way too long. And even at the point where she flipped on them again, she flipped on them, they survived, and she goes back to them. I think that was the strategic decision at that point. But again, she, just like Ah-Young, I think she's very good at ingratiating herself to the other players. She's someone that did win a deathmatch against Yeon-Hyun, so you have to give her credit for that, I guess. And she pretty much had the game won against Dongmin as well, though I think what you do have to really knock against her is her lack of confidence within herself. Obviously during Monorail, she makes a horrendous mistake and straight up loses the game due to that. And I think that's something you have to knock her for, but I think overall, I do look at her game ability as better than Ah-Young. I do look at her as someone that is more consistent in the game than Ah-Young. So for me, I had her here at number 18. Now at number 17, we have pretty much the most generic Genius player, in my opinion, out of the entire bunch. This is the person that's the most average Genius player ever, in my opinion. That is Jung-HOon. He was there. He was there. He played strategically. He won a death match. He lost a death match. He was there. To be honest, that's pretty much all I have to say about Jung-HOon. I just think he's an average player. I think he's capable at the strategic game. I think he's capable socially. I think he's capable at death matches. I think he's capable during main matches. Do I think he's the best at any of those things? No. But he's capable. So because of that, he lands here at number 17. Now at number 16, we have a player that I was really impressed by when I first watched the season, but I do think, in my opinion, of her game as a whole has dropped over time, and that is Yoon-Ji. I feel like Yoon-Ji is someone that I was impressed by the fact that she did win a couple death matches. She won against Poong in poker. She won against Yoram in the Image game, which was a terrible game. But the way she gamed that game, I think was impressive. And does eventually go out due to a game of Indian poker with Jin-Ho, who is one of the best players ever in Indian poker. So, I think there are some things that are impressive there. But I think she's another one that I think at points didn't make the greatest strategic decisions for herself. Didn't really know exactly what was going on. but she did seem like a self-interested player, someone that was playing to win the game. I think she's definitely one of the better female players in the history of the Genius, but that still only lands her here at number 16. Now, number 15 is someone that I really thought about putting a lot lower on the list, but ends up being this high, and that is Jung-HYUN. He is the first boot from Grand Final, so obviously on that season he doesn't really have much to do there, but on his original season, he was pretty much aloof a lot of the season. He didn't really know what was going on for a good chunk of that season, despite him actually winning a lot. I mean, he won the food chain. He had immunity during the safety chain. He had immunity during that King game where like almost everyone had immunity. Then he once again won the blackout game. He was in the majority for those next few rounds where Broadcaster Alliance came together. He was given immunity by Sang-min during God's Judgment. Then he gets pulled into 4 death matches in a row. And that, you would think, oh, that's terrible, 4 death matches in a row. But it's like, he won 3 death matches. I think the fact that he wins 3 death matches is pretty impressive. And those weren't like nothing death matches either. I mean, he won Same Picture Hunt against HONG-CHUL. He won Black and White against YOO-YOUNG, which I mean, that one was kind of just whatever. He won Indian Hold'em against G1. I mean, those are pretty good death matches to win. And he ends up losing in Black and White against YO-HWAN, who I think YO-HWAN's probably one of the best deathmatch competitors in the history of the game. And in Grand Final, he loses in Black and White again against Jun-SEOK that time. But I think this really shows the biggest flaw in Jung-HYUN's game in the fact that he isn't able to outthink that initial step. Now, the way he loses against YO-HWAN is by using the same strategy he won with by going against YOO-YOUNG, and YO-HWAN was able to outthink him there. So in Grand Final, he starts using YO-HWAN's strategy, but doesn't realize that Jun-SEOK can outsmart that strategy. So I do think he is like one step behind when it comes to next level thinking, but I do still find his deathmatch run pretty impressive. So at the end of the day, he lands here at number 15. Now at number 14, we have another player from Rule Breakers, and that is G1. And G1's someone that, I mean, I think he's another one that survived a few death matches. He won a death match against YONG-GYEOL, and he won a death match against JIN-HO. Then again, that JIN-HO one was just, again, that was kind of a fluky one where they just both all in and whatever. But he did win Sun, Star, Moon, but again, it was against YONG-GYEOL, who no one trusted. So, I mean, how much can you really give him credit for? But at the same time, he was in the majority for a lot of that game. He was someone that was well liked by the people within the game. It did seem like people really trusted him. He was able to build a really strong bond with YOO-YOUNG and HONG-CHUL, and did play decisively at points, had the blindside DO-HEE, and I mean, I think he did things within the game that I do find impressive. So for me, he's an above average player. He lands here at number 14. Now at number 13, we have another player from Rule Breakers, and we actually have the runner-up of that season, and we have YO-HWAN. And YO-HWAN's such a tough person to rank because he played the Genius in a way that no one else has played the Genius, where he actively plays from the bottom. He actively plays from a position where he's trying to lower his threat level, where he just wants to skate on by. And if he gets pulled into a deathmatch, he has the ability to win death matches. And I really do think the way that YO-HWAN looked at the game was really next level. He was really able to outplay a lot of the players on that season. I think one of the things, though, is that his thoughts were so next level, but a lot of that involved having to predict the actions of others, and sometimes he would be wrong, and through that he would look like an idiot. During the Truth Detector game in the final episode, where it's like he had a very innovative idea of trying to get Sang-min's number a bit quicker, but made a few missteps through that, and through that ends up losing that game. I feel like that's YO-HWAN just in general. That's the way he's going to end up playing the game, is in a way that if it works, it really works. But if it fails, it really fails. And we saw him do so many impressive things, like getting Sang-min to use his token of immortality on him, his gameplay, the way he's just, again, able to just scrape on by round after round after round, I do think is impressive. But then we saw in Grand Final just everything go wrong for him. I mean, he played extremely poorly in that game, and to be honest, I think that's the way it goes for him most of the time. But if he's able to squeak on through, I think he can have a very impressive showing. So for me, he lands here at number 13. Now number 12, and I think most people will look at this as a pretty low ranking for this person, but I felt like he was accurate, especially after Grand Final, and that is KYUNG-RAN. And I think KYUNG-RAN is obviously one of the best female players ever played the game. I think she's someone that was very good socially, had a decent enough strategic mind. I think one of the biggest problems for KYUNG-RAN for me is, one, I think her weakness in death matches. I don't think she is particularly good at that. I don't think she's like the weakest deathmatch competitor, But I think in comparison to a lot of the people we're going to be talking about very soon, I think those people are a lot stronger than her. But also, I feel like she's too loyal. I feel like she's loyal to a fault with certain people like Sang-min, Dong-min, and I think she really just kept on making moves that I felt like benefited other players more so than herself. I think really that's indicative of her grand final game, where I really felt like she was a lot less into the decision making on that season and became more of a follower throughout that game. While in rules of the game, I feel like she was a more active player, but even then, I felt like despite her being more active, she wasn't making moves in her best interest, and would sometimes be left out on the plans of like Sung-Yu or Sang-min. And really just overall, KYUNG-RAN is probably the biggest female figure on the show, and I think she is a very solid player. But I do think she has faults that really leave her out of that top tier of players for me. Now we're number 11. We're on to someone that probably shouldn't be this high. It's really weird this person's this high. And that is JUN-SUK, the first boot of the first season, but also 5th place finisher on grand final. And I think JUN-SUK is such an anomaly in reality TV, where again, he was the first boot on the first season, a lot of that being due to him being perceived as a big threat, and he does get really just outplayed by Sang-min, where Sang-min uses the Garnet heist and everything to get him out. But then he comes back for season 2 as one of the guests from the first season that get to play the layoff game, and really is able to outplay a lot of people on that, where he plays very selfishly at the end of that and wins it for himself. But then his return on grand final, I think, is really strong. I mean, he is put into deathmatch right away, but completely outplays Jung-HYUN there. He does remain on the bottom for a lot of that season, but I do think he's a big decision maker within that minority group. He plays really well during the fish shop round, where they completely outplay Hyung-min and Dong-min there, where Young-Sung and JUN-SUK get immunity there. He ends up in a deathmatch against Young-Sun in Monorail, but again, completely outplays him. I mean, a lot of that due to Kyung-Hoon's strategy, but still, he does outplay him there. And really, he ends up going home at the final 5 due to Quattro, which is Quattro. So I do think he's a very impressive player. I think he's very good at death matches, which again, in my opinion, is one of the most important elements of the game of the Genius. He has a very good strategic mind of the game. He's another really scrappy player. For me, that was all enough for him to land here at number 11. Now number 10, we're in the top 10 here, and at number 10, I have someone that people might argue needs to be higher. I don't know. I used to have this person higher, but I thought about it more. I was like, yeah, this person needs to be lower, and that is Kyung-Hoon, the runner-up of Grand Final, but also the second boot of Black Garnet. And Kyung-Hoon, I think, is just such a high variance player. I think Kyung-Hoon plays in such a really bombastic way that he needs either a good chunk of luck to get very far in the game or just a lot of deathmatch wins. And we saw on his first season where he was willing to just blow up the entire game during that first round just to get immunity for the first round and for him to be targeted that next round. Mind you, there were still people that were standing behind him and wanted to get Young-Suk out over him. But again, Young-Suk just simply outplayed him, I feel like, during the betting rock, paper, scissors game. So Kyung-Hoon gets an early boot there, but then on his return, I mean, he's just like someone that isn't trusted right from the get-go. He's someone that's completely ostracized right from the beginning and really gets picked up by Sang-min because of that, and really gets saved by Sang-min during that first round. I think Kyung-Hoon makes a bevy of really bad strategic moves in that first round of that game. He goes into a deathmatch with Sang-min and completely outplays him there. He's able to build a really strong bond with Dong-min that does carry him further into the game, but even then, he's still able to win a lot of death matches. And I mean, as I said, I think Kyung-Hoon is one of the best deathmatch performer in the history of the game, where he does very well in a varied amount of games. I mean, he beats JUNG-MOON in Same Picture Hunt. I mean, he beats JUN-SUK at Quattro, but whatever. He beats JIN-HO in double-sided poker. Again, JIN-HO, who is one of the best poker players in the Genius, he beats him in a poker game. I think that's all impressive. But then he gets completely decimated in the finals, but still, I think overall Kyung-Hoon is a great player. I just think he's a very high variance player, and I think he overplays a good chunk of the time, and he also just makes moves that aren't in his best interest sometimes, but I think he's able to recover from those due to deathmatch wins most of the time. So for me, I thought that was enough to land here at number 10. Now at number 9, we have the top placed female player on my list, and for me, that is Yoo-Young. And for me, I think Yoo-Young is a better version of KYUNG-RAN. I think Yoo-Young is someone that played from more out in front. I think she's someone that was more strategically involved with the decision making of the game. I think she showed that she was able to win death matches. She won 2. Mind you, again, if you look at which ones those were, it's very questionable. I mean, Go-Hap, she does legitimately win, but then the Blackout game is like questionable because that's really mostly just Do-Hee really messing up. But again, I think that's something you have to give her credit for too, is that she was able to build really strong bonds with people that wanted to keep her in the game. I mean, Ji-Won really wanted to keep her. Yo-HWAN was a pretty good ally for her. Sang-Min really wanted to keep her at that point. I mean, she was really well positioned there, and I think mixing that in with her strategic acumen and also the ability to win a death match, despite her losing against Jung-Hyun in Black and White, which that was a pretty poor performance. But I do look at her overall just as a more active version of KYUNG-RAN. So for me, she lands here at number 9. On number 8, we have someone that's actually one of the highest ranked one-time players in the Genius, and that is Jung-BEOM. And Jung-BEOM is someone that I think was able to strategically look at the field and know what he needed to do. I think he was very good at figuring out how to move forward. I think the problem with him is that he couldn't get the right people on his side at the right times. I think there were points where he was kind of left on the outs just due to other people taking charge and having more people around them. But I do think it's impressive that he was able to pull off what he pulled off at the Final 7, where he flipped the entire game on Dongmin and Hyung-Min and really gets taken out due to not being able to beat Hyung-Min in 12 Jeongi. Hyung-Min's one of the best players probably ever in 12 Jeongi. So, I mean, mixing that in with, like, I do think he's a solid deathmatch competitor as a whole. I mean, he did win a deathmatch against Jung-Hoon in betting rock, paper, scissors, which is a very cerebral game. I think overall Jung-BEOM is a very strong player of the Genius. I think if he did return for a future season, I think he would do pretty well, but considering all we have is his first initial run, I did feel a bit uncomfortable putting too much higher on the list. Now at number 7, we have someone that I think this person might be a bit too high when I'm thinking about it, but I do look at him as a pretty solid player, and that is Yeon-Sung. And this is the thing about Yeon-Sung, is I think within the main matches, I don't think he's that great of a player. I think he is someone that just has trouble getting within the majority. I mean, he was able to build bonds with like Young-Hoon and Jung-BEOM and had good relationships here and there. And then even on Grand Final, I mean, he had a really close relationship with Yoon-SUK, but really, he's never been the greatest main match competitor. I mean, he did win Fish Shot with Jun-SUK, which was very impressive. But outside of that, I mean, he was just kind of there for a lot of the main matches. But I do think he is a great deathmatch competitor. I mean, we look at his deathmatch record. I mean, he wins Black and White 2 against Yoon-SUK. That's a very impressive win there. He wins double-sided poker against SU-JIN. Again, pretty solid win there. He does end up losing the game during betting Black and White, but I mean, a lot of that was against Hyung-Min, who is, again, one of the best players ever. But also, I mean, I do think he made his own missteps during that as well. But coming into the next season, he wins Tactical Nori against YO-HWAN, again, one of the best deathmatch competitors ever as well. I mean, I do think his deathmatch record is very impressive. So for me, that was enough to land him here at number 7. Now at number 6, we have a player that's pretty similar to Yeon-Sung in terms of how he landed on each of his seasons, and that is Yo-Hoon, who obviously 5th place finisher on Black Garnet, and then I believe 9th place finisher on Grand Final. But I think Yoon's one of those players that always knows what his most optimal move is. I feel like he's someone that has the strategic mind, has one of the best strategic minds for the game. I think the problem is executing those plans. I think that's something he always had trouble with. I think he had trouble getting the right amount of people with him to pull off these moves. Again, he was part of that flip against Dongmin and Hyun-Min at the Final 7. But outside of that, I felt like he had trouble executing what he wanted to happen. He does win Memory Maze against Ah-Young, which, I mean, that's something. But then he loses against Yeon-JI, which I don't think that's a particularly great look. And then coming into the next season of Grand Final, I mean, he plays a pretty similar game, but gets pretty unlucky with the Loyalists and Rebels game, which was completely set up for him to lose that. And then in the deathmatch, where he does lose against KYUNG-RAN and Indian Poker, which isn't particularly great. But Indian Poker is a much more high variance game than actual poker, just due to the limitations of what they're working with. But overall, I mean, Yo-Hoon, I think, is just, again, one of the best strategic minds for the game. I think if only he could execute that, I think he really could have been one of the greatest players in the history of the show. But even now, I have him ranked at number 6. I don't think that's particularly bad. Now, number 5, we have the highest ranked one-time player in the history of the Genius. And really, the other 4, I mean, the top 4 are obviously the 4 legends of the game of the Genius, in my opinion. So number 5 here, not bad for Sung-Yu. And Sung-Yu, I mean, it's weird how he comes into that season looking like a doofus where he comes in with everyone just underestimating him, thinking that he's not going to know what to do because he's like this pop star. But I mean, he plays that first round pretty well. I mean, he wins the first game by turning his back on MIN-SEO and eventually wins a death match against Teacher Cha. And moving forward, I mean, I think from the final 8 on, I mean, he plays a very impressive game where he stays within the majority. Throughout that, has very good relationships with JIN-HO and Sang-min. He wins Kong's Dilemma in a very impressive way, turning his back on his entire alliance. Well, a lot of the reason why he ends up going home in that game is due to confined scamming horse race, where he doesn't have actual control over what he's able to do. I mean, a lot of that is down to his manager, whoever that guy was, who really just ends up screwing him over. And then he goes into a death match of tactical Yunori with JIN-HO and ends up losing that. But there's just that portion of this game that he really just dominated. I think he really displayed that he has a true ability for the game. It's a shame that we haven't seen him on a future season, because I feel like then we can really assess how good of a player he really is. But through this first season, I was impressed enough with him to put him here at number 5. And now number 4, and this is tough because these top 4 are pretty definitively the top 4. And I think a lot of people are going to disagree with who I have at number 4, because really, I think this person is the best character in the history of the show. I think this is quite possibly the best character in the history of reality television. I think for me, this person is such brilliant TV, but I think when really assessing their game of the genius, I think for me, Sang-min has to be here at number 4. And this is the thing about Sang-min, is that I think Sang-min plays one of the best games ever in the main match. I think he is one of the best main match competitors in the history of the show. I just feel like deathmatch wise, he is extremely weak. I mean, let's look at the death matches he's performed. I mean, the death match that he loses against KYUNG-RAN in season 1, same picture hunt, he does abysmal at that and really just never really had a chance there. He never goes to a death match on Rule Breaker, but essentially, again, the final games are death matches. And he barely squeaks that one out. I mean, really, YO-HWAN should have won that season if we're taking it from like how these games played out. Because like we look at the games that he played. Indian Hold'em, he loses against YO-HWAN. He wins in Truth Detector, but largely due to YO-HWAN deciding to use that out-of-the-box strategy that doesn't end up working for him. While Sang-min just barely squeaks that one out. And then in Quattro, Sang-min wins. But again, it's Quattro. He wins Quattro. I mean, come on. And then he returns for Grand Final, where he loses the first death match he gets put in, where he's up against Kyung-HOON in betting rock, paper, scissors, where Kyung-HOON just simply outplays him there. Like, I think just really his deathmatch record is extremely weak, and considering that's what you need to win the game, I just don't know how often Sang-min really wins. I think he got extremely lucky on Rule Breakers that the final 3 games ended up being those games that they were, because, again, Quattro and Truth Detector are not the most skill-heavy games. The only skill-heavy game there was Indian Hold'em, and he lost that one. So, I mean, as much as Sang-min is a dominant force in main matches, I mean, first season, like, while he didn't win that many, he was always in the majority throughout that season. Rule Breaker, I mean, he won, I believe, almost every single main. I think he won all but 2 main matches, which is just ridiculous. And then even on Grand Final, he won the first 2 main matches before he was eliminating the third one. And the way that he just completely outplays the entire field during that first main match is really, really impressive. So I think there's no denying that Sang-min is one of the best players ever. It's just a matter of how high is he ranked. And for me, I just couldn't put him higher than the 3 players above him, as they are so much better than him in death matches. Now, number 3, and this one, I mean, this one should have been number 4, but again, death matches had to put him higher, and that is JIN-HO, the first winner of the show. I mean, JIN-HO, I think, played a very sloppy winning game in Rules of the Game. I think he really had no clue what was going on a good chunk of that season, but largely survives due to his deathmatch prowess. And I think that's something you have to give him credit for. I mean, in death matches, I mean, he does win against GURA and EUN-JI in Indian Poker. He beats Sung-Yu in Tactical Yunori. And then in the final game, like, he wins against KYUNG-RAN in both Indian Poker and Go-Hap. I think really JIN-HO just dominated the death matches of that season, while also not being completely terrible at main matches. Again, like, the individual main matches are his specialty. He's very good at open pass. He's very good at 5-5 game. He's good at these games that he has to work with himself. I think it's mainly when he works with other people that he doesn't do nearly as well. But then we see him return to Rule Breakers, and I think that's probably his best game. I mean, he wins the first 4 main matches, which is pretty impressive. And then even then, when he's in the minority against YON-SUN and DO-HEE, he's looked at as such a big threat that people don't want to drag him into the death match as they're worried they're going to lose to him. And then he goes home against G1 in Indian Hold'em when they both went all in on the first hand, had to do multiple ties. Like, it's a really ridiculous scenario that happened. But I think that's probably his best overall game, where, again, I think he did very impressive in the main matches. He also wins that final game when they come back during the finale. He wins the game in Black Garnet where they come back for that one game there. And then in the grand final, I mean, I think while I didn't find the way he got there very impressive, he still got Final Four. Now, he does lose in double-sided poker against Kyung-HOON, which isn't particularly great. But, I mean, he still was able to squeak his way through to the Final Four by staying in the majority of the group, by aligning himself with like the Dongmin, Hyungmin group there. And I mean, I think that's something you have to give him credit for. Despite, again, in my opinion, the road there wasn't particularly great. But I think overall he is a solid player of the Genius. I think there's merit to all three of his performances on the show. It was never an early boot. So I mean, for me, I think Jin-Ho has to be here at number 3. Now number 2, the number 2 player of the Genius for me is Hyungmin. I think Hyungmin played quite possibly one of the best games ever in Black Garnet. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think he played a probably better game than Dongmin on that season. I think he was steps above Dongmin within the main matches. I think he knew what to do every single main match to game that game to their win. I mean, we saw him even in the game that he ends up losing in the Constellation game. He's the one to create the winning strategy that the opposition uses against them to turn the game against them. And even then, Hyungmin is able to win the death match against JUNG-BEOM in 12 Joggy, which is something he's ridiculously good at. They pretty much steamroll that entire season, and then when they get to the end, the final 3, he faces against Young-Sun in betting black and white and just completely wipes the field with him. And then he returns for Grand Final, where I think Grand Final really shows some of his flaws in the game. I don't think he plays nearly as impressive of a game there, but he's still a really dominant force in the main matches. He does make a major misstep in Fish Shop, and I don't think that was particularly great, but he's still able to get all the way to the final 3 once again and really just loses due to Dongmin, again, being the dominant force that he is. Again, Hyungmin is definitely the second best player of the Genius. He lands here at number 2. Now number 1, I mean, it's Dongmin. I mean, do I even need to say anything? It's Dongmin. I mean, it has to be. I mean, he's a 2-time winner of the Genius, but unlike like a Sandra from Survivor, I mean, the road that he got there on both of his wins is very impressive. Again, he steamrolled both of his seasons. Black Garnet, he completely decimates the entire season along with Hyungmin, and while I do think Hyungmin played better than him overall, I mean, Dongmin getting all the way to the end with as much support as he got towards the end game and being able to beat Hyungmin, one of the best players in the game, in same number hunt and betting rock, paper, scissors is very impressive. I do think he makes a major misstep during Monorail. I think that's probably the worst moment of his entire season, but still, he's able to recover from that moment almost immediately and get YONG-JOO to make a massive mistake on her own right. In Grand Final, he plays another very impressive game where I think Grand Final is really what cements him as the best player ever. I think he really just shows so many different elements of his game, from being obviously the expert main match competitor that he is, a very good social player, being able to build bonds, make deals with so many players, being very good at death matches, which we didn't really see on his first season because he never had to go in a death match until Monorail, where he really messes up. But then, obviously, as I said, he wins those 2 matches against Kyungmin, and then here on this season, he beats KYUNG-RAN in Gulhap in a really dominant fashion. He ends up beating Hyungmin in 12 Jonggi, and again, a very dominant fashion, and he beats Kyung-HOON in both Number Jonggi and Mystery Sign, 2 games they had never played before, in the finals, like, again, in a very dominant fashion. I mean, Dongmin is the most dominant force to ever play the Genius, and I don't think he can ever be beat. I think he's the most perfect, well-rounded player. To us, when looking at all these other top player lists I've done on this channel so far, and looking at the person I put at number 1 on all those lists, I think for me, Dongmin is the most clear number 1 out of any of these lists I've ever done. I think he's the most representative of what the Genius really is. I don't think you can really find that with Survivor or Big Brother as clearly as you do with the Genius here with Dongmin. So for me, he easily lands here at number 1. So there we go. That is my ranking of every player in the history of the Genius. This went too long, but I mean, obviously I was ranking 36 people, so what was I expecting? But yeah, that's everybody. That's every player in the Genius. I don't know how many Genius videos I'll really end up doing after this. To be honest, I love the Genius. I mean, it's one of my favorite shows ever, but there's really not much content to work with there. There's only 4 seasons. So outside of like revisiting videos, maybe a winner ranking or something, I really don't know how much more I can really do with the Genius, but I would like to do more in the future. But to be honest, it probably won't be for a while until I do another Genius video, but I thought it was nice to kind of revisit the series here by doing this video. But yeah, that's the video. That is my ranking of every player in the history of the Genius. Thank you for watching.